All right.
Good evening from Washington, D.C., and good day to those of you who are joining us from around the world. My name is Deepa Olapalli. I'm the Associate Director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies and a Professor of International Affairs here. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this event on Shedding Taiwan's Invisibility Cloak, the regional and global prospects for gaining greater international space. This is our sixth and last Taiwan Roundtable for 2021. And I have the three terrific panelists to talk to us about this very pressing topic: a diplomat, an academic, and a policy expert. So I think I've got all my bases covered here. Before I begin the main event, I need to make a couple of logistical points. First, this event is being recorded, and a recording of the event will be available soon after in the next few days, and we will send a link to that recording, which will be on our YouTube channel. Secondly, at the end of all the remarks by the panelists, I will start taking audience questions. But let me just say that you should feel free to start sending and posting your questions in the Q&A box, not chat, in the Q&A box, please. Throughout the event, you can do that. We'll collect it all we'll have it ready at the end. And one note, please ask short, concise questions. No commentaries, please. All right. Well, in 2021, we passed the 50th anniversary of the UN Resolution 2758, which seated the People's Republic of China at the UN. And so this is a particularly relevant moment, I think, to take up our topic on Taiwan's prospects for gaining greater international space. We want to look at how the constrained diplomatic environment for Taiwan has evolved most recently, and ask, how does the global and regional landscape look multilaterally and otherwise today? And it gives me great privilege to say that we have someone here who is absolutely ideal to lead off with these questions. Our lead speaker, Liang-Yu Wang, the Deputy Representative of TECRO. It's my great privilege to introduce her to you. She has a long and distinguished resume, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it short. The Deputy Representative is someone intimately familiar in navigating Taiwan through the international diplomatic space. She came to DC just about a year ago after spending 3 years in Geneva, serving as the Director General of the Bureau de Genève for her country. Prior to that, she was the Deputy Director General at the Department of International Organizations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She received her MC and MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School. So you can see why I can't think of a better person to talk about expanding Taiwan's diplomatic ambit. Following her, we will have our experts to join in the conversation as well. So right now, without further ado, over to you, Deputy Representative Wang, and you have about 10 minutes, please. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Deepa, and thank you for the very kind introduction. Good evening, and I should also say good morning. I want to start by thanking Professor Olapalli and the colleagues of Sigur Center for organizing today's event. And also, I truly appreciate this opportunity to join Professor Hsieh and Mr. Mazza to discuss issues related to Taiwan's international participation. I think I would like to take my 10 minutes to brief you the current status of Taiwan's international participation, the challenges we are facing, and the efforts we are making with like-minded countries. And I'm very much looking forward to our discussions later. I think the COVID-19 pandemic is a vivid reminder of two things. One, the world is now extremely interconnected, and because of this, two, international cooperation is more important than ever. Unprecedented cross-border challenges such as global health security, climate change, economic inequality, and human rights situation in various countries have further raised awareness of the importance of international cooperation and the necessity to include all stakeholders in the joint efforts. Taiwan's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and our assistance to and collaboration with countries around the world has demonstrated the vital role that Taiwan can and should play. Therefore, we very much appreciate that the Secretary Blinken of the State Department recently noted in a statement that Taiwan's international participation is not a political issue, but a pragmatic one, and the U.S. called for like-minded countries to support Taiwan's robust and meaningful participation through the UN system and the international community. We are also encouraged that this year, for the first time, the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting expressed support for Taiwan's participation in WHO and WHA. And yet, even though the United States, the European Union, and other like-minded countries have long supported Taiwan's meaningful participation in multilateral institutions, the space for Taiwan's participation is being further squeezed because of political interference. As some of you may know, Taiwan's experts, NGOs, journalists, private citizens, and even young students are totally blocked from entering UN venues and activities. And Taiwan's participation in the UN system remains far from meaningful. I would say Taiwan's gradual exclusion from the multilateral institutions in the past 50 years reflects how China is exerting its influence in the international system. In order to block Taiwan's international engagement, China has been taking a hybrid approach that includes imposing political pressure on member states and international organizations, and in the meantime, fabricating a legal basis to justify its actions through intentional misinterpretation of the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758. I think Mike will cover more on that, but I'll just touch a little bit on the Resolution 2758. If you take a look at the wording of the Resolution 2758, it does not mention Taiwan, nor the issue of Taiwan's representation in the UN system. At best, Resolution 2758 merely decided upon the question of credentials. That is the question of who represents the UN member state China, without implying a position on the scope of its territory, let alone endorsing the PRC's claim of sovereignty over Taiwan. Yet over the years, China has made the leap from a matter of accreditation to a political statement, even a legal claim. Therefore, the resolution is often wrongly cited to exclude Taiwan from taking part in meetings and activities in the UN system and beyond. As countries increasingly recognize the threat and that authoritarian regimes pose, they understand the value of working with Taiwan, a free democracy. To enable Taiwan's contribution in the UN system, we truly hope like-minded countries can work together to put an end to the UN discriminatory policy against Taiwanese passport holders. In recent years, the UN headquarters in New York posted a notice by its entrance which stipulates that Taiwanese visitors need to use a mainland travel permit, which is a visa-like document issued by China, as an ID to enter the UN premises. These new requirements has gone beyond the scope of security and safety protocols and has been deliberately used to prevent any Taiwanese participants or even tourists from entering UN venues. And this is clearly an act of the PRC exerting influence over the UN system. Other ways China has been using its influence to squeeze Taiwan's international space including reaching agreements with international organizations. I think the most well-known example is the 2005 secret memorandum signed between China and the WHO Secretariat, requiring China's approval for the participation of all Taiwanese experts in the WHO meetings and activities. This contributed to Taiwan's exclusion from the WHO, even as the world faced the outbreak of the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to point out that China's political pressure and malign influence not only affects Taiwan, but also has a much deeper and profound impact on the effectiveness of the multilateral system. Moreover, we need to be mindful how authoritarian powers are trying to reshape international institutions and principles. I think it is no secret that China seeks to act as a gatekeeper to UN access for non-governmental organizations. I'll give you an example. Just 2 months ago, the Wikimedia Foundation's application for observer status at WIPO was again blocked by China, despite support from the United States and a group of industrialized countries in the WIPO. In a meeting, the Chinese delegation claimed that the affiliated websites of Wikimedia contain a large amount of misinformation that run counter to the One China principle and UN Resolution 2758. And this is not a single case. We are seeing more and more incidents like this. If NGOs cannot pass China's censorship, their access to international institutions will be blocked. So in view of the malign influence that undermines international cooperation, democracies must work together to safeguard their values in international institutions. For Taiwan, even when its exclusion from international institutions has made it difficult, we are committed to acting as a responsible stakeholders and a force for good in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And we are taking a pragmatic and professional approach to work with democratic countries in addressing the regional and global challenges of our time. For example, Taiwan and the United States recently concluded the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue with the aim of deeper cooperation in the areas of supply chain resilience, countering economic coercion, strengthening 5G network security, and advancing collaboration in a variety of science and technology fields. Additionally, we have seen tangible benefits arise from the Global Cooperation and Training Framework. We call it GCTF, which is established in partnership with the United States in 2015 to better utilize Taiwan's strength and experts to address global issues of concern. Later on, Japan and Australia also joined the GCTF as full partners. The initiative assists capacity building efforts of the countries in the Indo-Pacific through training programs for officials and experts, while also enhancing Taiwan's multilateral cooperation throughout the region. Over the past 6 years, the GCTF has fostered creative cooperations on issues including law enforcement, public health, women's empowerment, cybersecurity, energy efficiency, and good governance. Experts and officials from more than 87 countries have attended GCTF workshop in Taiwan, and the forum will continue to expand. Taiwan's aspiration is to shoulder more responsibility in its close partnership with the United States and other like-minded countries, while working with these countries on a pragmatic basis to advance our meaningful participation and make concrete contributions on the international stage. We also pay close attention to the discussions of other regional and global initiatives. And we believe including Taiwan in related discussions and activities, is beneficial to the international community and is in line with the inclusive principle of multilateral cooperation. I think I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Representative Wang. First of all, you kept right to 10 minutes. Thank you. So that's an example for everybody, all of us. I think you've presented a very compelling and nuanced view of what the constraints are for Taiwan. And I have to say that clearly that makes your job doubly difficult. All right, we will come back to any questions for you at the end. But meanwhile, I'm delighted to introduce our two other distinguished speakers who hail from Washington, D.C. and from Singapore. First, we're going to hear from Professor Pasha Hsieh, who is an associate professor and the associate dean at the Singapore Management University School of Law. Professor Hsieh is not only a well-known scholar, but he also served at the WTO and Sherman and Sterling, which is a top law firm in the US. He's widely published and is the managing editor of the Chinese Taiwan Yearbook of International Law and Affairs, and his co-edited book, ASEAN Law in the New Regional Economic Order, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2019. So Professor Hsieh today is going to talk about Taiwan's participation in trade organizations and economic agreements as a player in the global arena and extend what we just heard into the more economic realm. So after Professor Hsieh will be Michael Mazza, a well-known name in Washington, and he is a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, the Global Taiwan Institute, and the German Marshall Fund. He writes regularly for the Global Taiwan Brief. He has contributed numerous AEI studies on U.S. grand strategy in Asia, defense strategy, and Taiwanese defense strategy. He has published in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Foreign Affairs, and so forth. And he is going to be speaking to us and taking off from his recent article entitled Righting a Wrong, Taiwan, the UN, and U.S. Policy. So he'll bring us full circle back to where we started. So with that, let me invite Professor Hsieh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Deepa Olapalli, for your invitation and your kind introduction. My topic today is recognition and Taiwan's participation in economic agreements. We all know that Taiwan's lack of diplomatic recognition has always been an obstacle for Taiwan to join international organizations. But the first issue I wanted to touch upon is the concept of recognition. When we talk about recognition, we should know that recognition has legal and political implications. From legal perspective, recognition can be understood as state recognition and government recognition. So Deputy Representative Wang just alluded to the Chinese representation issue. So that is a government recognition problem. The debate sort of ended with UN General Assembly Resolution 2758. Taiwan has been facing state recognition issue. It is true that under international law, an entity can be considered as a state if it possesses a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and a capacity to enter into foreign relations. But the legal interpretation does not tell the full story of Taiwan's participation in the international arena. Currently, Taiwan is recognized by 15 to 20 allies. We should know that political scientists understand recognition from a different perspective. They argue that recognition can be seen as a gradual process, and different form of recognition can actually be accorded within the space of non-recognition. This is very important to Taiwan's participation in trade and investment agreement because different form of legal recognition under various economic agreements actually result in legal effects, which in turn enhance Taiwan's identity and status. Now let me turn to the importance of Taiwan's economic agreement. Taiwan wanted to be part of Asian regionalism. And in order to understand Asian regionalism, we need to understand the three major waves of global regionalism. The first regionalism occurred in 1960s, but at the time, most trade initiatives failed. But in the second regionalism that commenced in 1980s, we see some fundamental changes. The economic growth of four Asian tigers, including Taiwan as well as China, become very noteworthy. ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also become very important. At some point, Taiwan wanted to join ASEAN. However, it's not feasible because ASEAN membership depends on recognition by 10 countries of ASEAN. Taiwan nonetheless successfully joined APEC in 1991. APEC's Taiwan's name in APEC is Chinese Taipei. We should point out that APEC is not a UN agency, and APEC members are commonly known as economies, and APEC summit is also known as leaders meeting. The third regionalism started in 2000s, so the inception of the Doha Round. And Taiwan also joined the WTO as a separate custom territory in 2002. And it's true that Hong Kong and Macau also joined WTO as separate custom territory, but the provisions they rely upon are different. Hong Kong's membership is based on the sponsorship by its metropolitan power, which is the UK, and its autonomy after 1997, it was confirmed by the PRC. Taiwan, however, joined WTO and the GATT based on Article 33 of the GATT, a government acting on behalf of a separate custom territory possessing full autonomy in the conduct of its external commercial relations. In other words, Taiwan is recognized as an independent government within the WTO arena. In the third regionalism, most countries switch attention to economic agreements, largely because of the impacts of the Doha Round. The emergence of mega regional trade agreement, or mega FTA, is particularly important, and Taiwan wanted to join the CPTPP, which was concluded in 2018, as well as the RCEP in 2020, and the RCEP has 15 countries, whereas CPTPP has 11 parties. So this slide shows that 7 countries in the Asia Pacific are both parties to the CPTPP and the RCEP, but Taiwan has not been a party to major trade initiatives. Taiwan has also focused on bilateral free trade agreements. So the list here provides the info on Taiwan's FTA partners. You can see that Taiwan has most FTA with its diplomatic allies, which are marked in blue, such as Belize, Marshall Islands, Eswatini, and Paraguay. But none of them are Taiwan's major trade partners. We should also note that El Salvador and Panama switched recognition from Taipei to Beijing. However, their previous FTA with Taiwan remained valid, and Taiwan used the official name in this FTA, Republic of China. In terms of the structure and commitment, Taiwan's FTA with New Zealand and Singapore are high-level FTA. Taiwan concluded this FTA under the WTO framework as a separate custom territory. The only FTA Taiwan concluded with its major trade partner is actually ECFA with mainland China. ECFA is considered as an interim agreement within the WTO law, means that ECFA only provides a framework, and after ECFA, Taiwan and China are supposed to conclude other sector-specific agreements, such as the Investor Protection Agreement and the Service Trade Agreement. However, Service Trade Agreement led to the so-called Sunflower Movement in Taiwan, so it was never ratified. So the negotiation stalled. So now let me turn to Taiwan's bilateral investment agreement. BIA are also commonly known as BIT, bilateral investment treaties, but also because of recognition issue, Taiwan commonly use BIA agreement instead of the word treaty. Taiwan has an extensive BIA network. particularly in Asia Pacific region and America. I should also point out that modern FTA also include investment chapters, and they usually supersede previously concluded BIA, but there are exceptions. Here, I provide the example of Singapore. Taiwan and Singapore concluded a BIA in 1990s, and in 2013, Taiwan and Singapore also concluded an FTA. Both agreements remain valid. In other words, if there are disputes between the two countries, there may be border shopping problem. India, Vietnam, and the Philippines also concluded new BIA with Taiwan, which superseded previous older BIA that were signed in the 1990s. And this by BIA were concluded between representative offices, and these new BIAs are important to Taiwan's new southbound policy because they include very detailed investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. And it's important to Taiwan because Taiwan was unable to join investor-state dispute settlement mechanism at the World Bank. Now let me turn to Mega Regional Trade Agreement that I just alluded to. Here I provided the ranking of FTA based on their economic scale. The RCEP is the most important FTA as RCEP 10 countries account for 30% of global GDP. For a very apparent reason, because joint and FTA require consensus by all countries, as China is a member, RCEP member, and it's quite difficult for Taiwan to join the RCEP. And the CPTPP is largely based on the TPP. And Article 5 says that any state or custom territory may accede to this agreement. So from a legal perspective, it's not so much an issue, but they are remaining political and trade issue. And after the conclusion of CPTPP, UK, China, and Taiwan have applied to join the CPTPP. But there are other issues. For example, Japan, which is an important supporter of Taiwan, but Taiwan's ban on Fukushima food imports, commonly known as nuclear food, will continue to be an issue. Brunei, Chile, and Malaysia may be pro-Beijing, but they cannot vote because they have not completed the ratification process. The only issue may be Peru, because its new left-wing government may be influenced by Beijing. Now let me turn to the EU and the United States. Both the EU and United States reiterate that they have a shared interest in deepening cooperation with Taiwan consistent with their respective One-China policies, which are different from Beijing's One-China principle. And in terms of the EU-Taiwan investment agreement, the European Commission for the first time in 2015 indicated that the EU will explore negotiation on investment with Taiwan. For a very long time, EU has adopted the so-called China First policy, but the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment was frozen by the European Parliament in 2020. And just 1 or 2 months ago, the European Parliament issued the very first Taiwan report in which the European Parliament urged the Commission to begin an impact assessment, public consultation, and scoping exercise on BIA with Taiwan. So this is a new momentum. Now let me turn to the United States. The list here provides the U.S. trade initiative with Asia-Pacific countries, and it's very easy to see that the United States has not very actively pursued FTA with Asia-Pacific countries. So far, the United States only concluded FTA with Australia, Korea, and Singapore. And most countries have TIFA, Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, with the United States, but the TIFA only facilitates trade dialogue. In the Obama administration used TPP as a major instrument to implement the pivot to Asia policy. But as many of you know, the Trump administration withdrew the United States from the TPP. And in 2020, the Obama administration, as Deputy Representative Wang pointed out, the Department of State started EPPD with Taiwan. And the DPP government's decision to allow U.S. poor imports containing rectavine may be considered as a milestone in Taiwan-U.S. trade relations. The TIFA meeting also recently resumed after it was suspended for for about 5 years. The United States recently announced that it will have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and the details will be announced in 2022. So it remains an issue of whether or not the new framework will lead to a new trade agreement. So I've talked about Taiwan recognition issue as well as other FTA. So other important trade issues regarding Taiwan are included in my new book, which just published by the Cambridge University Press. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hsieh, for giving us that very comprehensive but deep dive into the economic relationships and what the prospects are. We'll come back to some questions here. And just a note to the audience, please feel free to put your questions in. This is your opportunity. Meanwhile, let me now turn to last but not least to Michael Mazza for how to right a wrong. Michael?
Yep. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you for the kind introduction. And it's an honor to be on a panel here with Deputy Representative Wang and Professor Hsieh. So as Deepa noted, my AI colleague Gary Schmidt and I published a paper about 6 weeks ago now with the Project 2049 Institute looking at Taiwan's engagement in the UN system. And you know, our basic question going into this project was to ask what, if any, steps can the United States and its allies and partners take to secure Taiwan's deeper engagement in the UN system going forward. And sort of a key insight, nothing groundbreaking to be sure, but I think an important insight was that the United States is not currently approaching getting Taiwan greater space within the UN system as a negotiation with China. And it should be. Right? Essentially today, the United States, raises its hand once a year and says, we want Taiwan to be invited as an observer to the WHO or to ICAO, or, pick your annual meeting or triannual meeting. And other allies and partners will raise their hand and say the same thing. China says no, and that's the end of that. So it should come as no surprise that isn't working, right? So what Gary and I wanted to sort of put forth was essentially a negotiating strategy, right? If you want to achieve meaningful participation for Taiwan in the United Nations and affiliated agencies, then perhaps that's simply observership. You need to aim higher, right? In hopes that China will then meet you halfway. In order to get a better handle on what that negotiating approach should look like, we did a somewhat deep dive into the history and legal arguments surrounding Taiwan's engagement with the United Nations. It's a fairly long paper, so I'm going to sort of skim over some of this fairly quickly, but I'm happy to address anything in more detail during the Q&A. So, the first question we pose in the report is to ask whether the expulsion of, the quote unquote representatives of Chiang Kai-shek, which is how Resolution 2758 put it, was the expulsion of those representatives grounded in international law? Our basic answer is no. So, first of all, it's important to note that the People's Republic of China was not admitted to the United Nations as a new state, and the Republic of China on Taiwan wasn't expelled. Rather, the representatives from the ROC were expelled, and the PRC's representatives were seated in their place under the logic that the country of China had undergone a simple name change. Was that a legitimate assessment to make, and was it legitimate to replace the ROC's representatives for that reason? Doing so rests on an assumption that the international legal personality of the state in question, again, in this case, China, was preserved. What does that mean? So entities who are endowed with rights and obligations under public international law are said to have international legal personality. And, by our argumentation, it's clear that by 1971, both the PRC and the ROC on Taiwan had undeniably distinct international legal personalities, and that remains true to this day. And that, of course, raises another question. If both the PRC and the ROC had unique international legal personalities in 1971, again, when Resolution 2758 was adopted by the General Assembly, was the UN's decision appropriate as a matter of international law? And again, our answer is no. Of course, there's a case to be made for the PRC's inclusion in the UN and even on the Security Council at that time. But it's harder to make the case that the PRC was the successor state to the ROC, right? That it was the same country again, China, but with a new name, given that the ROC never ceased to exist, and what's more, continued to meet the Montevideo Convention qualifications for statehood that Professor Hsieh talked about. And so a true reckoning of the state of affairs in 1971 would have recognized the existence of two states, both with a right to UN membership and both with reasonable claims, to the so-called China seat on the Security Council. And so, again, we see the legal justification behind 2758 as fraught. Yeah, the second thing we dove into, the second question we asked was, where did the United Nations OneChina policy come from? And is it, essentially, is it legitimate? And what we discovered was that basically Kofi Annan made it up in 2003. We could find no public references to a one China policy at the United Nations prior to that time. And then Ban Ki-moon a few years later went even further and frankly did significantly more damage to Taiwan's position by claiming that the United Nations considers Taiwan to be part of the PRC in accordance with Resolution 2758. Which of course is nonsense, right? As Deputy Representative Wang put it, Taiwan is not mentioned anywhere in 2758. The word Taipei doesn't appear. It doesn't address questions of sovereignty. And even Zhou Enlai admitted as much to Henry Kissinger in 1971 and was somewhat dismayed by that fact, was concerned that the resolution didn't go far enough because it didn't take a position or settle matters of sovereignty over Taiwan. So, in the years since those Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan statements, UN agencies have issued similar statements and adopted related resolutions. And so that, the UN leadership now acts as if the UN has made a determination on the status of Taiwan and that it has long maintained a one China policy. But the problem is the United Nations has not made such a determination. It cannot make such a determination, and it has never formally adopted such a policy. Again, this is one of those things I'm going to skim over here. I'm going to ask you to take my word for it, but if you want me to kind of dive into that argument in more detail later, I'm happy to do that. So, having looked at the legal reasoning behind 2758 and taken a look at where the UN One China policy came from, we then turn in the paper to taking a look at the why Taiwan's engagement, why its inclusion in the UN system makes sense for policy reasons. And we see three kind of interrelated, but three broad baskets. And, first, not to sound trite, but we live in a globalized world, right? But despite its marginalization, Taiwan isn't a pariah state. It's an important player in the world's economy. It punches above its weight, given its population size. What happens in Taiwan and what happens in the vicinity of Taiwan matters to all engaged in global commerce and global travel, which is why Taiwan's exclusion from organizations like ICAO and the WHO and others makes little sense, given those organizations' purposes and goals. The sort of second basket that we look at is why this makes sense when it comes to U.S. policy. We argue that Taiwan's meaningful participation in the UN is consistent with the U.S. One China policy. It's consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, right? That requires the United States to maintain the capacity to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion targeted at Taiwan. And we see, China's marginalization of Taiwan on the global stage as one such form of coercion. And to our mind, it's not in the United States' interest to allow that form of coercion to continue, to allow it to be successful. You know, as I said, Taiwan's economically important, it's strategically important. I think U.S. credibility is at risk in some respects. And, you know, Washington should not want Beijing to conclude that bullying pays off. And then the third basket, the third sort of big reason why this matters is that, again, to go back to the Montevideo Convention, you know, that reflects current and customary international law. And if we are to live in a world in which international law is to have some bearing, is to have meaning, then it makes sense that Taiwan be included in the UN system because that is consistent with international law. So given all that, you know, what would a new approach that I sort of started off my remarks in mentioning, what would that look like, right? And we argue that the United States should make clear to China that absent far greater Chinese flexibility in having Taiwan participate meaningfully in international organizations, that Washington should be prepared to undertake a full court press on full membership for Taiwan. I'm going to kind of skip over what that might look like. Again, I'm happy to get into that in the Q&A. You know, why do we think that pushing for a full membership might get us to something like, you know, consistent observership in a variety of agencies? You know, first, a full court press on membership for Taiwan might make allies and partners more willing to pressure China for a compromise, right? I think allies and partners probably don't want to get dragged into a big fight within the UN system over Taiwan's membership. You know, secondly, an effort of this nature would have to be sustained over the long haul, over a period of years. Essentially, the United States would be taking a page from China's playbook from the 1960s and early 70s and 1950s. Sustaining an effort like this would not only enhance the U.S. bargaining position, but it would demonstrate to allies, partners, and adversaries alike the United States is in this for the long haul, right? So if China wants to, you know, this is not going to go away. China's going to have to deal with it one way or another going forward. But most importantly, from China's perspective, the risk of a full court press is less that it makes the case for Taiwan's inclusion in the UN, and more that it essentially makes the case for diplomatic recognition of Taiwan. So as the U.S. builds the legal rationale and the policy rationale for Taiwan's participation in the UN and seeks to bring that about, it may introduce a trace of cognitive dissonance into U.S. policy, right? And so as a U.S. campaign for full membership in the UN progresses, the U.S. may find it increasingly difficult to stick to the One China policy, its own One China policy, as it's traditionally been understood. And Beijing should want to stop the U.S. from going down that road. And I will stop there. Thank you, Deepa.
Thank you, Michael, for that very persuasive case that you just made. It builds in with everything that we've heard from the previous two speakers. And just a couple of points before I open it up for questions from the audience. You know, what I'm hearing from all of you in very convincing ways is that when you look closely at the regulations, at the resolutions and other legal basis, that really the legal basis for Taiwan's exclusion is mostly a fiction. And that the question is, how do you then undo that? Now, you suggest that the U.S. take the lead in having a full court press. Professor Hsieh talked about the economic pathway as a way to get around it. And of course, the deputy representative has their work cut out in multilateral organizations. What I'd like to just throw out to all of you very quickly, if you will, is in terms of your own priorities, what would be your highest priority in what you'd like to see happen in terms of where the pressure should be and what should be the first way of loosening that legal fiction? How should the international community, the U.S. allies, what would be the most important thing for you? So perhaps I can start with our first speaker, Deputy Representative.
Yes, thank you, Deepa, for these questions. I think I will go back a little bit to what's the origin of the intentional misinterpretation of or the fabricating of the legal basis. Um, uh, Michael touched upon that it started in 2003, 2007. The UN system started to claim the One China principle. And coincidentally, that's roughly the time when Chinese or Chinese nationals started to hold high-ranking positions in the UN system. For example, starting from 2007, Chinese nationals has been holding the position of the Undersecretary of the UN. And so recently, there are more and more discussions regarding how China is using its leadership position in the UN system to insert or to provide its narratives and eventually make its narratives sounds like the practice in the UN. So I think the first thing democratic countries need to be aware what is going on in the UN system. And from what I can see, I think now democracies is already being very much aware of the situation in the international organizations. And so the next step is, and there are already more discussions on the reform of international organizations. And I think the next step is to really expose these kind of malign influences in international system. And that's also something I think democratic countries are doing now. And I think from public statement, we can hear like-minded countries are talking about now they are paying more attention to the leadership position of international organizations. But in the meantime, I think it's also important to pay attention to the like middle level management officials in the international organizations. It's important also for them to take a neutral stance and to fulfill their obligation as an international civil servant. So I think we need to first expose the issue, and for democratic countries to also safeguard the system and the value of the international organizations. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Before I continue, I just want to take a question here that's related to and something that is related to exactly what you just said. This is from Tina Chung, reporter for Voice of America. She asks the question that Beijing has long insisted the One China principle is accepted by the international community. How does Taipei challenge the political narrative legally under international law? I just want to say that this was a question that also came up, but you've just responded partly to that. So let me move to the others and see if they'd like to add something. And she has a second question, which Michael might go to the thing that you left out, which is Biden administration has been supportive of Taiwan's, quote, meaningful participation in international organizations. Have there been any tangible results? And if not, what are the main hurdles in overcoming China's opposition? Asking similar questions, but a little more pointed. So perhaps I'll turn it to you, Michael, and then to Professor Hsieh.
Sure. So, on your original question, Deepa, about sort of where do I think U.S. priorities should be? So just within the kind of topic I covered, I think the United States should be making this legal argument about 2758 much more frequently and much more publicly. To me, that is, the United States stands on very solid ground there, and that puts China and its defenders and UN leadership on the defensive. And so I'd want to be having that argument on legal ground instead of political ground to a much greater extent, because I just think it's a winning argument for the United States and Taiwan and others who want to see Taiwan's deeper engagement. To get to Tina's question, hi Tina. Yeah, so look, I think the Biden administration has picked up where the Trump administration left off in supporting, meaningful participation for Taiwan, but that in both cases hasn't amounted to a whole lot. I don't think we've seen major successes, right? We've had yet another year in which Taiwan was not invited to, to appear as an observer at the World Health Assembly. And I think, I think the obstacles are that China has, a lot of friends in these organizations and has, secured their support via means upright and not so upright. And that the United States to date, again, this is not just the Biden administration, but it's the Trump administration and the Obama administration before his, has not been willing to sort of play the same games that China is willing to play when it comes to securing these invitations for Taiwan, right? So if we want Taiwan to be invited to participate in next year's World Health Assembly, then the United States should be cajoling and, when necessary, coercing other states to vote alongside us and throw their support behind Taiwan's participation. For whatever reason, the United States just has not been willing to play that game.
All right, and now Pasha for a economic and/or legal perspective on this.
Thank you very much, Deepa, and for the question. And I do share the comments by Deputy Representative Wang and Michael about China's misrepresentation of UN Resolution 2758. So maybe we can just go back to the facts of what happened in history. And no one can deny that from 1945 to 1949, there was only one Chinese government, that is the ROC. And so the Taiwan issue became an issue after 1949, because the fact is that there have been two governments in so-called China. So the reality is that we have been having a divided China problem. But a divided China issue, it's hard to sell for various reasons. And first, the pragmatic reason is that China is so much bigger than Taiwan. And secondly, China has monopolized the word or the country China in the international arena. So when it's hard to persuade allies and the like-minded country that Taiwan also represent part of China. So that's a problem for Taiwan to advance its diplomatic claim in reality. So in response to Deepa's question, so what is a priority? So if we cannot or find it very difficult to change UN Resolution 2758, so what is the interim measure that we should focus on? So it goes back to my presentation. And I would argue that it will be important for diplomatic allies, particularly EU and the United States, to exercise, to assert a leadership role in advancing trade agreement that include diplomatic countries. For example, an EU plan to initiate investment agreement with Taiwan, and in the European Parliament report that I just alluded to, also talk about changing the name of Taiwan's of EU's representative office in Taiwan. The United States should also focus on a more pragmatic approach to Asia, including Taiwan, by concluding meaningful trade agreement. So the trade agreement per se will send a very strong signal to Beijing that EU and U.S. So-called OneChina policies are fundamentally different from China's One China principle. And they will also help Taiwan to meaningfully participate in international agreement. So these are my responses to your question. Thank you.
All right. Just a quick follow-up to the three of you. Given that we're in the middle of the pandemic and that Taiwan has been a success story in fighting the pandemic through a variety of tools, I'm quite surprised that at this moment that there has not been a diplomatic way of getting Taiwan at least observer status at the WHA. Can anybody give a comment on what has been the biggest obstacle? It seems like this would be an opportune moment. Why hasn't it worked?
I think I would just take this one.
Okay.
In my remarks, I also mentioned about in 2005, WHO and China signed a secret memorandum requiring all Taiwan's participation needs to go through China. And so I have to say that nowadays in the UN system, the political influence from China's side is still very strong. And the leaders of international organizations, they also need to uphold the value of the international organizations so they can make the right decision, because Taiwan was invited as observer before 2016. And so this time we very much regretted that the Secretary General of WHO couldn't fulfill his obligation as the leader of WHO to issue invitation to Taiwan. But in the meantime, we were very grateful that we are seeing more and more like-minded countries voiced out their support of including Taiwan in the WHA and also the activities of WHO. So for that, we very much appreciate that. And also related to the previous question, I just would like to add I think countries now realize the importance to include Taiwan in the work of international organizations, and how China has used misinterpretation of the resolution 2758. So actually, not too long ago, just last month, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Department in a public event, he also mentioned that the People's Republic of China has misused Resolution 2758 to prevent Taiwan's meaningful participation. So what I want to say is that I think now countries started to recognize the seriousness of this problem and are taking actions, and we hope that there can be more countries that also follow suit, that we can hear more like-minded countries and democracies to defend their values in international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't want to end without taking a question from a student, actually a former student, is Josh Pope, GW alumni. He asks a question. The Indo-Pacific concept has allowed many countries to find areas of mutual interest. How much of Taiwan's recent success in security and diplomatic cooperation with more countries can be attributed to the rise of the concept of the Indo-Pacific? I know strategically it's been very important. Economically, we talked about in 2022, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So how important is that concept has been for Taiwan's?
Yes, for us, we certainly want to serve as a partner in terms of security and economic partners to the United States and like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And so we have been very closely coordinating with partners on issues of mutual concern. I think recently the Quad meetings have been talking about, for example, global health security and emerging technologies. And those are the issues we also continue to coordinate, and we do hope we can have more collaboration with like-minded countries. And also, as I mentioned earlier, just last month, we held our second EPPD meeting, Economic prosperity and partnership dialogue with the U.S. And in that dialogue, the issues of emerging technology and health cooperation, and for example, like 5G networks, these issues are also discussed there. So we are hoping that we can expand these kind of exchanges and coordinations with more like-minded countries.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me invite Pasha to weigh in on this, since you had that in your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deepa. I do share what Deputy Representative Wang just said. Of course, Taiwan's trade and COVID-19 success story can definitely contribute to the Indo-Pacific concept. And the concept is actually new. The Trump administration focuses on the security concept, and whereas now the Biden administration and want insert more economic component into the Indo-Pacific country. And I think if the new framework, Indo-Pacific framework, can lead to tangible trade agreement that include Taiwan and other diplomatic allies, and that will send a very strong signal, not just send a very strong signal to Beijing, and also help the United States regain its leadership in the Indo-Pacific region.
All right. Well, I guess we have now reached the time where I have to bring this to a conclusion. I can say safely that we've had an extremely stimulating discussion, very clear, convincing, persuasive, compelling presentations by all of you. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to do this early morning, late night in different places. As I said, this is our 6th and last Taiwan Roundtable for this year, but our other ones that we have had, all our recordings are available on our YouTube, on Sigur Center website, Rising Powers website. So I invite the audience to listen to this. We will have this link out shortly, and I look forward to seeing you all in the new year. And I want to wish everybody happy holidays, wherever you may be. And thank you again for joining us today. Bye-bye from
Thank you.
DC.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.